I hate myself, 39/M, for the way I allow my ex, 37/F, to treat me. My wife, 37 years old, and I, 39 years old, did not have our marriage last long after the pandemic. Admittedly, I was not a good husband during the last year of our relationship. We welcomed our second child during the pandemic. I was an essential worker, and she wanted to be a stay-at-home mother. We lived paycheck to paycheck, and the stress consumed me. I became neglectful and selfish, making her feel completely alone even when I was right next to her. Currently, we have been separated for nearly 4 years, and we have almost reconciled several times. The last genuine attempt at reconciliation was nearly 2 years ago, prior to another man. I do not know his exact age, but he is around our age, coming into her life while we were attempting marriage counseling. I began to notice repeated lies regarding this so-called friend, and I felt like a paranoid individual for questioning things. I ended the counseling when it became too overwhelming for me, feeling deceived even during our sessions. About a week after that ended, my son was sick from school on one of her days with the kids. We share custody 50-50, and I work near her to ensure we can see the children. She was unable to take time off from work, so I missed a day to care for my son at her house, which is an hour away. That was when my son spoke about the other guy, leading me to discover that he was living at her home. From that point forward, I decided to take a step back. There was a cycle where we would have significant arguments and not communicate outside of discussing the kids. However, like clockwork, every 2 months she and the other man would have massive fights, and foolishly, I would let her pull me back in as she would discuss trying again. I would end any connections with anyone I was dating. Not because I was convinced it would succeed this time, but because I know myself, I would begin to ignore them for a chance to be with her, and nobody deserves that. Therefore, I recently stopped dating entirely and sought counseling to help me move on. For the past year and a half, I have witnessed every conflict between them worsen. This man is a recovering drug addict and alcoholic. I discovered this about a year after he and his 3 children moved in with my ex and my kids, and the recovering seems to be untrue, at least concerning alcohol. To her credit, when situations became severe, whether due to her relationship with him or her own depression, she would inform me, and I would take the kids away to protect them from witnessing any negativity. These arguments would involve him using terrible language, bringing up her past trauma, and even destroying items I had given her. We still exchange gifts for Mother's Day, Father's Day, Christmas, and birthdays from the kids since they are still very young. 3 months ago, a significant argument occurred. In a fit of rage, he destroyed her room, smashed her bedroom door, and, as she described, he was barely holding back from physically assaulting her while detailing how he could manipulate her with affectionate names and other tactics. He did not work, did not have a car, and she was financially responsible for everything, including expenses for his children. Nonetheless, she expelled him and his kids from the house, and despite any issues between her and me, I felt genuinely proud of her for her actions. She asked me to keep the kids for a few additional days to help her regain her composure and requested my presence when discussing the situation with the kids and why his children would no longer be present. I agreed. I initially planned to be a supportive presence during this conversation, but she surprised me by telling the kids that we could start doing family activities together again. I was overjoyed. However, a few weeks later, I found it difficult to communicate with her. The man returned, and to make matters worse, my 2 kids began arguing, the one trying to disclose his return while the other denied it. I suspect they were instructed not to tell me, but this remains speculation. Last week, another outburst occurred. He again vandalized the hallway, her bedroom, and my son's room. I had helped redecorate his room at her house because he desired a space theme before Christmas. She blocked him from all forms of communication, cleaned up the damage herself, and informed me that she was done and wanted us to go on a real date. After the initial destruction of her room, all I asked was for her to be honest with me moving forward. Even though the kids informed me that she continued to deny any relationship with him, it took another incident of him damaging her home for her to finally admit that she had allowed him back into the house. We had our date last night. I should have anticipated the outcome. The man was unblocked, and she was texting him throughout the evening. While I understand that abusive and manipulative relationships can cause individuals to behave irrationally, The aspect that hurt me the most was that she not only lied to me multiple times about this, but also tried to reinforce the lie while looking me in the eye. I did not explode or lose control. I genuinely believed she wanted me to, so I could be the villain in the situation. Instead, I chose to appreciate the date night since I was already present. What worries me now is that instead of telling the kids that he had caused the damage, she opted to deceive them by claiming she accidentally created the mess while rearranging things. Even at such young ages, the kids are already questioning this. I have been apprehensive for some time about the example this sets for my daughter, witnessing him returning after causing repeated destruction. As I reflect tonight, I recognize the example this must set for my son, observing me getting swept back into this cycle of pain time and time again. I have been so focused on her issues that I have not paused to consider whether what is unfolding between us could be a form of abuse. I think I have become the soft place for her to land every time, knowing that I desire to repair our relationship so deeply that I refuse to leave. My question is, what is the best way to disentangle myself from this cycle without compromising our effective co-parenting? No matter what has transpired between us, it has never interfered with our co-parenting. However, this time feels different. It feels as if the situation will escalate to something greater and more severe than any conflict we have previously faced, and I am afraid. I understand that a very honest conversation needs to take place between us, not regarding her relationship with that man that is not my place, and I am the last person she wants to hear that from, but rather concerning the need for her to stop the deception. She struggles with several issues, including severe depression and bipolar disorder, which I am pleased to see her taking more seriously with medication and therapy. I try to be supportive by taking the kids more often when she is having a difficult mental health day. However, the constant dishonesty has led me to question if she is actually experiencing a bad mental health day or merely seeking a free babysitter on those occasions. I dislike thinking this way because, if it is indeed a challenging day, I want her to feel she can ask for help without facing judgment, but that suspicion will always linger in my mind. I feel as though my world, as I know it, is on the brink of collapse. While that may not inherently be a negative thing, I am fearful because it will impact not only me but also my children. Story 2. The message I'll never send to you. It is 3:28 a.m. I believe my schedule has been disrupted for several weeks now. It has almost been a year since we last met, and the nights still weigh on me, but you do not. Sometimes, I think I am nearing the end of this grief. I wonder if someone is needed to come into my life and evoke feelings similar to what you once made me experience. I must admit that I continue to think about you. There are only a handful of days in a week when you do not cross my mind, but I have accepted this as part of my new normal. I no longer remember you with pain. In fact, your memory has begun to fade. I can no longer recall the sound of your laughter or what you might have thought during my times of uncertainty. I cannot even picture the jokes you would tell when something amusing occurred. However, I still find myself wondering about how you are, what you are doing, and what your new home is like. I ponder whether the memory of my presence, which lingered in our old residence, still troubles you. I must confess that I recently had a glimpse of your new kitchen. I saw a refrigerator and thought about the one I adorned with stickers from all my travels. Every time I looked at it, I could recount a story about where I acquired each sticker, what project it represented, or who gifted it to me. I always made an effort to find a Simpsons sticker just to see you smile. You once expressed a desire to fill your fridge with stickers, and I managed to do that. As for me, I am doing well enough. The initial months were challenging. I felt the cold of winter and spent almost the entire year sleeping on the second-hand couch I procured upon moving into this new apartment. I know you remember it. You sat on it once. To continue, I used to sleep here, on the very couch where I am writing this, as the light from the lamp and the television soothed my loneliness. But over time, and with assistance from Fabry, the gray cat I adopted because you would not let me take ours, I found my way back to my bed. He shares the same color as the cat you have now or the one you share with your new partner, who, once upon a time in my 20s, was my friend. Anyway, Fabry was already his name, but I decided to preserve it in honor of my best friend, who cared for me during the hardest moments of my grief. Fabry assisted me in returning to my bed, the king-sized 2x2 bed that seemed enormous. Today, it is filled with pillows, and a few guests have slept in it, but only a few have spent the night beside me. At one point, it was merely a guest bed. You once told me that I would end up alone, and I still recall that day vividly. Yes, I admit that I did end up alone, that my family completely fell apart. But please do not feel guilty, it was already broken. I simply did not see it then. Relationships now feel quite distant. And yes, I spend a considerable amount of time alone. In fact, more than just alone, I spend my days with Fabry. He was also abandoned, but he is the most grateful and loving companion I have ever known. Honestly, I enjoy solitude now. I have come to appreciate it. I spend many hours online, far more than I did when you knew me. My interests have shifted somewhat. I believe I have evolved in some way and am now more selective about whom I spend my time with. I have experienced numerous adventures in these 11 months since we last saw each other. In the past, I was eager to share them with you. Today, I try to be more cautious with my words and selective about whom I share my achievements with. Nevertheless, I have found happiness. I have achieved nearly all my goals from last year, visited places I never thought possible, and collected incredible stories. You know me, I love to take risks for the experience. I always believe I have nothing to lose. I have also met new people, but nothing particularly meaningful. Sometimes, I think I have an emotional barrier. Other times, I consider that I simply have not encountered the right individuals. Yet ultimately, there was someone who held me while I slept for the first time, granting me peace when I needed it most. Following that, others came, some for a night, others for weeks, but nothing beyond that. Reflecting on it, I feel I am on the right path, the long one, where one heals in solitude and occasionally shares a little love with strangers. On another note, my financial situation is quite dire. I am no longer in the same job as before, and the project I co-founded with my partner is currently in a chaotic phase. Our relationship has also deteriorated. However, I have discussed it extensively in therapy, and gradually, I am learning not to invest too much in any single relationship. Despite all of this, I am managing well. I am stable. I have learned to ration food similarly to how you did. I started CrossFit with my friends from the neighborhood and adhere to a protein-focused diet. I strive to be more organized, and I even learned how to mow the lawn. I also traveled for my birthday, just as I once promised myself I would spend every birthday away from my hometown. I am not sure if I ever mentioned this to you, but I feel sadness at not having a family birthday gathering. The last time I celebrated, you organized it for me. Today, that remains one of my fondest yet saddest memories. However, last year, I celebrated with my best friend on the opposite side of the globe. Unexpectedly, at midnight, I found myself traveling in a van with someone who greatly reminded me of you. She was the first person to hug me. I remember it distinctly, and it brings a smile to my face. I confess that, until that day, I was still anticipating your message. I thought you would reach out to me. Nevertheless, my best friend made every effort to make me happy. It was a wonderful birthday. We strolled down the pedestrian street in the city where I lived before meeting you. It looked the same as before. I drank too much and received messages from people I did not expect. I left that country realizing it was no longer my home. Back in 2022, during our fight, I impulsively purchased my ticket to seek refuge with my friend, wanting to see if that place where I had once been happy was still my home. At that time, I returned thinking my home was in your embrace. This time, I simply departed knowing that chapter was closed. I said goodbye because, deep down, I believe I will not return. There is nothing left for me in that country, only memories of when I was incredibly happy. Finally, since I suppose I should sleep, I will tell you that the girl who once made you envious has helped me find my smile again. I would not say we are friends, but she opened the doors of her life to me, and I, in turn, shared a little of my life with her. I still remember, about 3 months ago, after returning from my trip, our mutual friend, the one with the eyebrows, told me that you were dating that girl who was once my friend. Actually, more than a friend. When we were 20, she was part of my circle of friends, and I always had feelings for her. One day, nearly 10 years ago, she came to my parents' house. I can barely recall how that story unfolded, but we spent time together and shared a bed in what was my bedroom. After that afternoon with our mutual friend, upon discovering that you were taking her to the places I once took you, displaying her like a trophy you won in a soccer tournament, just as you did with me, I resolved to burn all my bridges. Every time I dream of you, I simply turn to artificial intelligence. My therapist says that although I enjoy living on the edge, I now do so with a railing and invisible boundary that no longer permits me to revert. Story 3. I am at a crossroads because of my 30M, girlfriend's 28F, bad habits and mental health. Hello, everyone. I find myself at a pivotal moment due to my 6-year relationship with my girlfriend. Unfortunately, I believe the current situation is not sustainable. I would appreciate some outside perspectives to determine if anyone has faced a similar scenario. To provide some context, we have been living together for 4 years and continue to do so. Firstly, my partner tends to be very negative and anxious, and any minor inconvenience can ruin her day. This could range from a coworker saying something she finds upsetting to experiencing a slight discomfort in her body or hearing something she dislikes on the news. She seems to interpret everything in the most pessimistic light possible and often imagines worst-case scenarios as if they were reality. This frequent negativity results in her becoming upset often, which in turn affects my mood as well. While we do have good days occasionally when she is cheerful and playful, I feel that the proportion of bad days to good days is excessively high. Having 2 or 3 emotional breakdowns each week cannot be considered normal, right? I try to provide her with emotional support during these challenging times, but most of the time it does not seem adequate. Furthermore, when I attempt to be objective and highlight that her concerns are not significant, or may even be unfounded, she accuses me of invalidating her feelings, claiming that her emotions are genuine to her, which sometimes leads her to turn against me. This pattern has persisted throughout our relationship, and although she attends therapy regularly to address her mood swings, the improvement appears minimal. I must emphasize that on good days, it feels extraordinary, genuinely perfect. I wish it could always be like that. Secondly, I often desire to spend time on my hobbies independently, such as coding, gaming, or reading. Yet, when she has free time, she frequently seeks my company. Otherwise, it seems to upset her. For instance, she wants to go out for a drink or insists on watching television or a movie together every evening. This is not something I particularly enjoy, and although I occasionally agree to join her in these activities, I also decline just as often, which appears to make her feel that I'm not contributing enough. Conversely, I am passionate about the outdoors and would love to go hiking together once in a while, but she despises that idea. I do not blame her for this, as it seems our entertainment preferences differ significantly. While I am comfortable with having different interests, she becomes upset when we do not engage in shared activities frequently. We live together, so we already spend substantial time together, and I cherish my me time, which is quite limited. Thirdly, she does not contribute much to household chores. She does not sweep or clean the floors, nor does she cook meals. In fact, if I do not prepare food, she simply will not eat. Although she is responsible for washing pots after I cook, I often end up doing this myself, as otherwise, they would remain dirty in the sink for days. She does not do the laundry, take out the garbage, or buy groceries. Moreover, she is quite messy and leaves a trail of disorder wherever she goes. For example, if she eats yogurt, she will leave the cup and dirty spoon where she ate. The same goes for drinking cups, which can remain in the same spot for days until I pick them up. I am compelled to handle all these chores independently. Otherwise, they simply do not get accomplished, and the house becomes untidy in a matter of days. I have even tested this to see if she would do anything about it. She did not. I have discussed this issue countless times with her, expressing my dissatisfaction. I have asked her to clean up after herself and to share the chores with me, but she claims, "I have no time," because of work. However, I find this excuse invalid, as her work schedule is one I would dream of having. I work more hours than she does and manage to maintain tidiness. Cleaning up after oneself only takes a few minutes, sometimes even seconds. Fourth, this issue may relate to the previous point, but I think it deserves its own mention. She seems incapable of accomplishing anything without external assistance. For instance, on the rare occasion that she does take care of a chore, such as hanging clothes, she will come to me asking for help rather than doing it herself. If she needs to go somewhere, she avoids taking public transportation at all costs and will call her regular taxi driver, her mother, or even me. I often refuse to act as her taxi service because if I am mature enough to take the bus, which I frequently do, she should be capable of doing so as well. I have witnessed her call her mother to drive her places that are less than a 10-minute walk away. I find this very inconsiderate. It shows a lack of respect for other people's time. The same applies to cooking and cleaning. She is more inclined to call her elderly parents, who are 70 years old, for assistance rather than handling matters herself. I believe her parents contribute to this situation by enabling such behavior. She does not seem to recognize this as detrimental and expresses no remorse about wasting other people's time, particularly when she is a young woman in her prime, while the individual helping her is a much older person with many responsibilities. Fifth, the atmosphere in our home is often filled with negativity and bad days, which has led to a complete lack of physical intimacy. We have not had sex in a long time. The last time was perhaps 2 years ago. We attended couples counseling, but we reached no resolution. I expressed that I do not feel much affection from her, despite my continuous efforts to show her love. She has mentioned a preference for me to approach her in a more mature, seductive manner rather than in a playful, romantic way, but that is not part of my personality. I also do not appreciate her sexual approach, as it does not resonate with me. As a result, we seem to be incompatible in this regard. Her mindset often dwells in negativity and anxiety, which does not create an inviting atmosphere for intimacy. Consequently, we have lost interest in it altogether. Our moods frequently clash. I tend to be optimistic and lighthearted, while she is more often moody and anxious. In conclusion, I have come to realize that I tend to enjoy myself more in her absence. When she leaves the house, it feels like I can finally breathe. Conversely, she does seem to value our relationship and expresses gratitude and affection sporadically, which makes me feel guilty for having these thoughts. I honestly feel like everything has plateaued, and while I love her and believe she is a wonderful person, I do not want to spend the rest of my life in this manner. Discussing these issues and bringing them to light has not resulted in any changes. We both acknowledge that we should work on these matters as a couple, but the dynamics often revert to the previous state soon after. I feel as though I am nearing a point of no return. Therefore, I ask if anyone has been able to salvage a relationship in a similar situation, or on the contrary, if there is little else I can do to effect change. The prospect of breaking up is extremely daunting, and considering the logistics and emotional distress it would cause, especially for her, leaves me feeling overwhelmed and incapable of handling such a situation at this time. Story 4. Ayo. I am a 25-year-old female who formed a friendship with Mary, a 30-year-old female, in 2023. We connected through a class we attended together. Initially, we exchanged texts and visited a couple of places. At that time, my financial situation was limited, and I couldn't afford to go out often, making around $200 a month. Sometimes, that increased to $300 if I managed to pick up some extra work. Eventually, I secured a paid internship and decided to take her out for a friendly outing. I paid since I proposed the idea. On the next occasion, she offered to cover the costs, which she did. Over time, however, it became apparent that I was the only one spending money and making an effort to see her. I often provided the means for our outings. I should mention that she cares for her brother's children, which will be relevant later. I contemplated offering her assistance, knowing that her earnings likely went to the children, or so I believed. I mistakenly thought I had a crush on her brother, but I realized it was mere infatuation. That night, he accused her of being dishonest, which I dismissed, stating, "I would prefer to hear that from her, not you." Eventually, my husband moved from another state to live with me. I began prioritizing my budget for him, as this is an open marriage, which will be important later, rather than spending on her. I invited her to come to my home, but she always had an excuse. She continued to ask me for financial help, which I provided because I was thinking of the children. She ended up owing me a total of $400, often citing excuses like, "I forgot my card," and I would send her money via cash transfer without a second thought until my husband pointed it out. I lent her my PlayStation 5 because I rarely used it, under the assumption that she would either buy it from me or purchase her own. A few months later, during the summer, She expressed interest in going to the beach with my husband and me, unaware that he was my husband. I chose not to disclose this as I prefer to keep my relationship private. She often complained that we made her feel like a third wheel, even though he barely spoke to me in her presence. At the beach, I was intentionally swimming and playing away from her to avoid her annoyance. She asked him to teach her how to swim, and he agreed. I observed them from a distance, indifferent to the situation, but noticed she was sitting next to him with her legs wrapped around him, making him uncomfortable. She attempted to pass it off as playing tag. Afterward, whenever I wasn't nearby, she would eagerly lean toward him, yet he showed no interest not due to me, but because he genuinely did not like her and tolerated her only because of our friendship. We ended up at a Wendy's after the beach, and she made a comment, "Wow, his anatomy is impressive. Do you ever notice it?" I looked at her in disgust, wondering why she would even ask me that, and replied, "That's my best friend." She immediately dropped the topic. We brought her back to our small apartment, and for some reason, I felt uneasy leaving her alone with him. He had been drinking during our ride home and was finally dozing off after nearly 24 hours of being awake. Something within me made me not trust her in that state, so I arranged an Uber for her. I should mention that she is terrible at responding to texts or calls, but consistently expects me to make the effort. Following that incident, I stopped trying to invite her to do things. I would no longer reach out first. Instead, I let her contact me, as I was genuinely tired of attempting to keep our friendship going. When my husband's and my birthday came around, we are literally 14 days apart. She was supposed to join us and our friends for my event over a few days. Suddenly, she claimed she had work as soon as she realized I wouldn't be paying for her plane ticket and that we would be driving instead. I felt relieved, as I suspected she would cancel last minute, which she ultimately did. However, we had already filled her spot, and all 5 of us squeezed into the car, thoroughly enjoying a birthday trip that lasted nearly a month. A couple of months later, she finally decided to share the truth with me. A full year later, she told me that the oldest child was, in fact, her child. My husband had already figured this out, and I had been defending her all along. That night, her brother also mentioned that one child belonged to her, prompting me to insist on her honesty. I confronted her the next day about it, and she remained evasive. When she finally confessed, I bluntly told her, "I'm more upset that you confirmed Matt's suspicion. He figured out you were not telling the truth, but thanks for finally coming clean." Interestingly, for many months prior to the beach incident, she had called me her best friend. I tried to move on from it. I bought some gifts for her child because I felt compassion. Recognizing how she treats her kids in front of me reminds me of my own upbringing, which lacked the additional trauma. I would advise her, instead of yelling at the 2-year-old, why not communicate with her appropriately? "You believe she is intelligent enough to understand." She would respond, "She just yells and won't stop." I demonstrated that engaging calmly with the child led to her quieting down, even picking her up and showing her affection. When she made a mess, I would guide her to clean it up, speaking gently rather than shouting. Her oldest child, a 12-year-old girl, genuinely misses me because I make the effort to engage in conversation with her. I reassured her that I was there to listen if she wanted to talk, of course, with her mother present, and treated her as a person deserving of respect rather than a servant. Months went by, and she began dating a 50-year-old man, planning to marry within 6 months of their relationship, already introducing him to her children. I thought, that's peculiar, but it's not my decision. Meanwhile, she continued to request things from me. At this point, I started declining her requests, suggesting she ask her boyfriend instead. My husband became increasingly frustrated, believing I was being too kind in my responses. Consequently, he urged me to retrieve my PlayStation 5 one day because he wanted me to cut ties with her. I comprehended his reasoning and couldn't argue against it. A few days ago, she messaged me, asking for help with digital invitations. Initially, I agreed, but later realized I had no idea what her fiancé's name was or what specifics she wanted. She merely responded with white and gold. I found a website to create the invitations and sent it to her. Did I mention that she is a terrible communicator unless she wants something done immediately? Once I informed her that she could modify the details and send them out herself, she ceased texting me again. This conversation that should have lasted 10 minutes dragged on to 3 days with barely 2 replies from her each day. I understand I may not recover my money, and I know I would miss the children, but honestly, it feels increasingly unworthy. She often asked, "Why don't you come to me with your problems?" I replied that it was due to her frequent unresponsiveness, which is true, but I also believe it's because she is less mature than me. She has made comments like, "What if I could hack into your work computer?" Which she certainly cannot, and I even had to explain the potential consequences of that behavior to her after she proudly mentioned jailbreaking an iPad. I have given her a total of $50 because she got caught smoking in public on 2 occasions while police were nearby. Am I overreacting? Story 5. I told my mom she contributed to Brad's suicide after years of her toxic behavior. Her reaction, complete denial and rage. What now? My mother, who is 51 years old, has recently had a significant confrontation with my brother, Ron, who is 25, and his wife, Jess, who is also 25. My mother has always had her own set of problems. Although she has never been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, I am, and her behavior often mirrors mine in that regard. We have had numerous disagreements over the years, especially after I came out as transgender about a decade ago. Our conflict escalated to the point where I ended up living with my grandparents, her parents, and moving several states away. Although she did not expel me, I felt unsafe transitioning while living under her roof and seized the first chance I had to leave. I was greatly hurt by the situation, but I have managed to uphold a relationship with her from a distance. While I have not forgiven her, I have chosen to move on. A few years ago, my twin brother, Brad, took his own life. I was not particularly close to him after my relocation, but from what I understood, he had a tumultuous relationship with our mother. When I visited, I would overhear their disputes, and some of the remarks my mother made were appalling. Brad had his own struggles, but arguably no more than any other young adult his age. The general consensus among everyone except my mother is that she played a role in his suicidal thoughts and was a significant factor in his death. He was serving in the military at the time of his passing, which resulted in financial compensation for the family. Unfortunately, Brad only designated my father as a beneficiary, which left my mother heartbroken. After his death, she quickly changed her narrative about him, portraying him as a saint, and began publicly attacking her ex-husband on social media, blaming him for Brad's passing. She even reached out to local journalists to further amplify her claims. She asserts that my father manipulated Brad into giving him money, which she believes should belong to her. My older brother has a 3-year-old child whom my mother heavily relies on as a substitute for her lost son. She would play with him in Brad's room, which she adorned with his memorial photos, prayers, and even his ashes. She even pressured Ron and Jess into naming the child after Brad, since he died just a few months before the baby was born. Clearly, she was not coping well. She behaves as if she cannot do any wrong and believes that everyone is out to harm her. It is unfortunate, but it seems closely tied to mental health issues, so I try to overlook it when possible. She has had a tumultuous relationship with Ron and Jess, particularly with Jess, who doesn't seem to like her at all. They appear to be polite in person, but both engage in disparaging talk about each other behind one another's backs and use Ron as an intermediary in their disputes. My mother often takes it upon herself to parent their child in ways that Jess objects to. Recently, they had a significant argument where Ron confronted her about her parenting and her consideration for others' feelings. He specifically pointed out that she had a role in Brad's death and was a reason I moved away. Jess called her out for her behavior towards her and her child, claiming my mother was disrespectful at every opportunity. While I agree with them, I wouldn't express that sentiment to her directly because I know it wouldn't lead to anything productive, and since I haven't been present for the last decade, I prefer to remain uninvolved. I would like to stay out of it, but as the last child who still communicates with her, she continually seeks my support. She expects me to affirm that she is in the right and that Jess is manipulative, but that perception is unrealistic. When she first brought the situation to my attention, I found nothing surprising in her remarks. Much of what she found offensive were issues I had noticed 10 years prior, motivating me to distance myself. I did not contribute or mention anything Ron had previously told me about her, but I did text him to express that I understand his actions and believe he is making the right decision. Ron and I are not close, and he did not respond to my message. My theory is that I am also distanced from that side of the family, which I understand, so I have no intention of pushing the matter. What would be the benefit for me in doing so? I am genuinely proud of him and his family, but I recognize that I can be theatrical like my mother, which would not be a positive influence on their children. My mother continues to reach out to me, trying to sway me to her side and convince me she is justified. Eventually, I could not avoid addressing the issue any longer. I did not want to be involved. All the problems are literally hundreds of miles away from me, and my only desire is to support Ron's choices. I texted her that Ron had valid points and that she does indeed exhibit the behaviors he accuses her of. She was displeased with my message. She erupted on the phone, delivering a frenzied explanation about how she has always been a good mother who has done her best, claiming it is unfair to hold all of this against her. I reminded her that she is angry with her parents for taking me, and that Jess likely feels similarly about her relationship with the grandchildren. She disconnected the call, and a few hours later, sent me a barrage of messages insisting that she does not deserve to be treated like a villain. She believes there is a conspiracy involving Ron and my father to exclude her from the family. She insisted that she always loved Brad and argued that it is unjust to assume there was any link between her and his suicide. I had been trying to avoid speaking on behalf of my brothers, but I genuinely believed she would not grasp the situation without a unified perspective from all of us. I realized that if she remains unable to see it, then no one can change her viewpoint. I told her that I endorsed Ron's perspective, that Brad had specifically cited his issues with her before his death, and that she must listen to their concerns, accept responsibility, and stop adopting the victim role. I told her she is upset with her parents for failing to take responsibility for the abuse they inflicted upon her, and she is merely perpetuating the same traumas in yet another generation. I conveyed that she lacks any influence over her grandchildren that her children do not grant her, and it serves her no purpose to persist in presenting herself as a victim to me because I align with their perspective. She has not replied for a few hours, and I am beginning to worry that I may have crossed a line. While my message was not emotionally charged, its content was significant, and I am uncertain how it will all unfold in the long term. I genuinely did not intend to get involved, but I refuse to indulge her emotions for the next 20 years. I am apprehensive that I may have aggravated the situation for Ron and Jess. I feel I should not have commented on the issue since I have not been present for most of the conflicts, but Ron spoke for me by attributing my departure to our mother's actions. I do not care if they have reached an understanding. I am just exhausted by my mother's self-pitying narrative. While I have my own issues with my mom, I do not wish to cut ties with her, especially since I am her last child and can empathize with our shared struggles, which my brother did not inherit. Am I in the wrong? Should I apologize? How can I best support everyone involved without overstepping my boundaries? Story 6. My partner, 33M, said our holiday is trash after I, 32F, asked, "Why is it so bad?" It is currently 11:15 p.m. in Vietnam. I cannot sleep because, for the past 3 hours, I have been arguing with my partner. This is not our first disagreement. It is not even the first conflict during this trip, but it is certainly one of the most intense. I feel compelled to recount how the argument progressed. I want to document it now so that I do not forget any details or how I feel at this moment. In the last 24 hours, we have had very little rest due to our flight schedule and the long wait times to check in at our hotel. We are not at our best and are trying very hard not to let our emotions and fatigue overwhelm us. This morning, we spent time resting at the beach, using the beach chairs since we couldn't check in to the hotel just yet. Finally, around 2 p.m., we made it to our room, both extremely tired and depleted. After showering, we went out to grab some food and drinks. It was enjoyable, and I was relieved that our previous argument hadn't spoiled this trip. I felt somewhat proud of how I handled that situation, almost. I say that because, once again, I found myself at the mercy of his temper. After our meal, we decided to take a walk along the beach. I noticed that he seemed tense and agitated, likely due to lack of sleep and withdrawal symptoms. He became annoyed when I asked him about this long walk. I wanted to watch the local surfing competition, but understanding his mood, I chose to go along with his idea of a lengthy stroll. I watched him swim at the beach while I listened to music and observed the joyful tourists around me. When we returned to the hotel, we headed to the pool. I ordered food and drinks. It was happy hour. I suggested he drink my cocktails since I didn't want to risk a headache later. I was aware that being exhausted and consuming alcohol does not work well for my body. I ordered a Hawaiian pizza and wanted to wait for our drinks and food to arrive, but the drinks came first, along with some peanuts. While I was on my phone waiting, I grew a bit restless and uncomfortable from my wet pants. I think he noticed too, so he suggested that I go get my Kindle. I hesitated at first, but decided that maybe 10 minutes later, I would return to our room to change and grab it. I was gone for approximately 10 to 15 minutes. Once I entered our room, I found myself torn between blow-drying my pants or changing into a nicer outfit in case we decided to return to the beach. Earlier, he had mentioned wanting to get food and drinks near the beach area. Returning to the pool area, I saw him sitting in a chair, relaxing. I noticed there were 2 slices of pizza left. I had taken one and told him to have the last piece since I was still full and didn't want to overindulge, in case we went out again. I read my Kindle, but I slowly started to fade, feeling the fatigue creeping in. He went to get another drink and we headed back to our room. We did not exchange a word in the elevator. Just so you know, the pool was on the 15th floor, while our room was on the 14th. Once we entered the room, I collapsed onto the bed. I cannot recall if I was mindlessly browsing on my phone or reading my Kindle when he placed his bag on the table and asked, "Why are you so quiet?" In a rather foolish manner, I responded that there was nothing to talk about. That was a regrettable mistake. His entire demeanor shifted, and I could tell he was disturbed by something. However, I was exhausted, and in hindsight, I should have asked if he was upset. Instead, I continued reading while waiting for him to finish his shower. The details of what happened next are fuzzy because I was so frustrated by how everything transpired. I remember seeing him change into his clothes and lie down on the bed. He put on his earphones and began looking at his phone. I kept reading my book but was also hungry and weary, and I became aware of the time. It was 8 p.m., and I realized that if we wanted to go out, it was now or never. I mentioned this to him, and it was clear he was still upset, although I was confused about why. I decided to ask since I was too tired to guess. He then responded with something like, "I want you to guess since you enjoy playing this game so much." I understood what he meant. My coping mechanism since childhood has been to shut down when I am upset, as my feelings and concerns were often dismissed or trivialized. I felt utterly drained both physically and mentally because I knew this confrontation was unavoidable. The fight and the pain that accompanied it were heavy. After much shouting, mostly from him, I only wanted to cry out of frustration. He expressed that he was upset about my comment that there was nothing to discuss and was displeased with my silence. Essentially, my actions set him off. I became very distressed and left the room to get food. I had not eaten dinner, but I quickly realized my appetite had vanished when I stepped outside. I went to the rooftop to cry, returning about 20 minutes later. I put on my earphones, selected some sad music, and planned to cry myself to sleep. However, this seemed to trigger him further, and he began punching the hotel wall. I disassociated, either looking at pictures of my family and pets or staring blankly at the wall. Tears continued to flow, and my nose became congested. I kept sniffling. His anger escalated, and he yelled and struck the bed. At one point, I asked him what he wanted me to do, and he replied that I should remain silent while he raged. I attempted to reach out to some domestic violence shelters, but they only serve local clients. I consulted ChatGPT, but the suggestions were generic. I looked into Vietnamese helplines, but only phone services were available, and I was unsure if they catered to English speakers. It is now 11:55 p.m., and I have scarcely slept. I am contemplating whether I should buy a ticket home, jump from the hotel rooftop, or cry myself to sleep. I am extremely fatigued. This is the first vacation we have had in over a year, but now I wish I were dead instead. I hope someone out there can offer advice since I feel lost about what to do.